Good morning. My name is Tess and I'm co-host of the Event Tech Pull-Up. We are coming live to you from Event Tech Live here in Vegas. This is day two. Day one was absolutely wonderful. Keith?
Yesterday was absolutely fantastic. I thought our stage was killing it. It's been for the first time in the States, I think Adam and the team have done a really good job. And again, thanks to Performedia for letting us use this awesome space to stream.
Yes, and I think also we've had the ability not only to see people, players that have been in the game for a long time, but we've also had an opportunity to actually look at technology that's brand new. So please take a look at our posts that are going to come soon in the future. All right. So today, Peter, we are very happy to have you. We want to thank you again for this lovely setup for us to be able to go live
My
for
pleasure.
the
You
event
guys
tech.
are pros, so it's always good to have solid pros in the booth for sure.
Oh, we appreciate that. But I heard a little something. Actually, Keith told me a little bit about it, that you had some ideas. Because when we think about kind of what happens in our industry, we kind of think about the same old, same old. People's experiences as attendees the same now that we're face to face, and then also exhibitors. Oftentimes, they expect the same thing, even though they have beautiful booths and setups, but they act and look the same. And I think Keith, am I correct that he had a wonderful idea as it relates to exhibitors? You want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so Peter, you actually had the great blog post that we were all reading, which was about the exhibitors' Bill of Rights. And, a little different from tech, right? We're at a tech show, but a lot of this does involve tech. And I think, one of the things during the registration process, which actually they do here at Event Tech Live, so is asking attendees what their interests are during the registration process. And I know we had mentioned that, I went in my head and my clients, and I'm like, no, some of them actually don't. So why don't you, tell us a little bit about what your thinking is on getting those interests and how it can actually help the exhibitors at every show.
Well, I had the experience for a long time of being the little guy. I still sort of feel like the little guy, right? So I get my little 10 by 10, right? And I hope somebody's going to come up and say, hey, what do you guys do? That's a very rare experience these days, Mostly people are walking, like that, trying to avoid eye contact, trying to avoid you saying anything to them so they don't have to then say, I'm not interested in what you're doing, right? Or whatever. So there's a lot of this sort of avoidance going on. And so I never had a great experience at shows. And then in 2020, right before the pandemic, I went to ACEHP, right? It's the medical educators, and they sent me unexpectedly an Excel spreadsheet of all the attendees who had opted in to have this be shared and their interests. They gave them 10 categories or 15 categories, and I thought, oh my God, this is such an earth-shattering change, because all of a sudden I knew people who were interested in what I did. And so I sent out some emails to the 50 people or whatever who said they were interested in what we were doing, which was, all they had was video production. We're like, okay, we do that. And so we sent them emails. I had 12 meetings set up by the time I got there, just sending them invitations and having them come back. Didn't even do it through any kind of a platform arrangement, just sent them emails. And then because I'd seen the list, I was looking for name badges as they walked up and down the aisles. I had another 10 or 15 meetings there because I knew who these folks were. I knew what they were interested in. And so this really opened my eyes, because this was night and day. Doesn't even quite describe the difference between before and after. And I feel like everyone should be doing this for exhibitors, because it's no skin off of anybody's nose. Your attendees can opt out, right? So you're not in any way busting GDPR or anything like that. It's okay. If they don't want to participate, that's fine. The thing we found in 2023 was they did the same thing, but they had changed it a little bit, and they were no longer requiring the attendees to answer the question. They could still opt out, but they weren't required to answer the question, so we found that very few people bothered to, and so it died at that point. So we would just say, one, get the information, let them opt out, so it's legal and good. And two, require it just the way you require last name or address or email address, so that we get good data from it. And if they can opt out, it's great. And so we just thought that really should be the number one thing on, if there were such a thing as a sponsor and exhibitor's Bill of Rights, that to me would be my first choice. And it's such a game changer. And remarkably, in my opinion, it's so rare. It's like 1 out of 10, maybe less. In my, sort of anecdotal experience, I don't have the research to back that up.
So, what kind of commitment do you think that exhibitors can make to that as well as planners? Because it sounds like if it's a Bill of Rights, then both parties have to be in agreement. So, what kind of incentive do you think would be good to drive on both sides prior to the event
Sure.
for it to happen?
I think that the appeal for organizers, which I think is what you're talking about, was the organizers' gimme from this, right? It's happy exhibitors, right? Who are not, as dissatisfied with what have you done for me lately or what have you done for me, period, right? It answers a really big question. I think makes the whole show more valuable and more attractive to exhibitors. It certainly makes it a lot easier for me to decide to spend $4,000, $5,000 on a 10 by 10 if I know I'm going to get a list that I can use out of that, and now I can do something at your show. And we had some other ideas too. I don't know if you want me to rattle some of them off, but there are other ways to help little guys and big guys alike, I think, with similar sorts of.
Yeah, and I think, as an attendee, when it comes to the list, before we hop on to your next point, but when it comes to the list, if I'm going to a show, I actually don't mind sharing my data, especially if I'm sharing my data with companies that I'm interested in. I am an event technology guy. I am at this show. I would love it if all these people reached out. They don't need to do the heavy sales thing, but I at least want to get their information, and learn more about them. It's really funny, when you're walking around the show floor, I bumped into a company I had never heard of, and I was listening to what they do, and I'm like, oh, I need you in my life, right? But to your point from earlier, most attendees don't do that, right? They walk through like this. But I did want to move on to the next thing that you had in the article that you had written was about the floor maps, and it is amazing how many shows don't have exhibit hall maps and they don't post them for the attendees. And it's also funny how many of the event app providers make that. It should be standard in every event app, but some of them it's an upcharge, or whatever, to actually be able to put in that floor map. So what happens is a lot of organizations that are on, say, smaller budgets, will bypass that and skip it. But yes, those floor maps are really important.
And I want to be cognizant of the organizer's dilemma, right? Because their expo hall changes 7 times, right? It's bigger, it's smaller, it's bigger, it's smaller, it's this way, it's that way. So I understand that. But when you promise somebody they're going to be right by the entrance, and then all of a sudden they find that at the opposite end by something that does not open, that's not good. So having some way of kind of tying some of your commitments to the new maps by creating the connections or whatever of the commitments that you made, I think is important. And displaying the map early, trying to make it as accurate as you can, as much of the time, I think is also sort of critical. But I understand totally that things change. It's a changing, malleable kind of world out there, and we're not expecting the impossible or asking for it, but just remember, when you tell somebody something about access or where they're going to be, that you want to try to live up to that commitment if you can, even though things change somewhat along the way.
So, stepping outside the Bill of Rights for a second, just to be an advocate for exhibitors and sponsors, what is maybe one or two things that is on the innovative side that you wish could happen and occur at a particular show? Because I think oftentimes we kind of expect attendees to come, exhibitors and sponsors expect attendees to come to them, as opposed to them being assertive, and it's almost like a dance and a balance. But I always want to kind of know and understand, even from someone like you who may be out there exhibiting a lot or sponsoring a lot or partnering a lot, what is the coolest thing that you think, what do you really, really desire that you haven't seen?
I'm not sure there's a lot of that. I sort of feel like this is basic blocking and tackling that does not get picked up on over time. I mean, we're big fans of the passport idea. It's old as the hills, right? And it's now, in our platform make it work for both on-site and online folks. So if you're online, you can go and you do the thing and you get the confetti, and now you got the extra points or whatever if you're in some sort of a competition. But the thing is that without that, if you're a little guy or a new guy, nobody knows you and they're not going to. So I feel like it makes sense. It's not like a rights thing as much as it really makes sense for the organizers to offer that. Let me pay $1,000 or $2,000 to get into that and make them come by. It's just like when they come and grab my candy. I'm going to grab their hand and say, before you take that, Mr. Goodbar, what are you interested in? You know? But it's the same. It's a little bit longer. People tell me, can you fill out my thing? I'm like, I will, absolutely. Tell me what you're interested in. And, you know, I got 10 folks saying, oh, well, now that you mention it, you know, they're prospects. They just otherwise would not have, you know, interacted with me. So I'm a big fan of something old school like that. I'm a big fan of putting things in the way, sort of like the casinos here in Las Vegas. Have you walk the 1,000-yard thing through the casino before you get to the elevators from the registration desk, right? You do the same thing with exhibitors and sponsors, and you put the food among them, or you have people walk through that to get to here or there that they need to get, and the drinks, right? You know, and so a lot of that's just really basic blocking and tackling, I think. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't have anything like, I wish there were more holograms, you know, or something like that. I don't. I just wish that some of these basics would be more like everybody was doing it, you know?
Yeah, well, and that's the IKEA idea, right? You know, there is a reason why IKEA is laid out like a maze. You are walking through and they're showing you all of the things that you may not know they even have. And when you walk out of IKEA, you went in for a bookshelf and you walk out with a whole new house full of furniture. You know, and one of the final points that you had made in the article, by the way, and just so everyone knows, we'll put a link to the article in the show notes for this afterward. But was like, give us a hand in the exhibit hall. You know, that was your final point. And I actually want you to dive into that a little bit because I think that can actually help organizers know and understand, you know, what exhibitors, you know, are looking for. You know, what type of a hand are they looking for?
I'm trying to remember what we said about that.
He's like, I wrote that? You wrote that?
Give us a hand. And I'm like, what did I say about that? So it's apparently, according to this, it's a little bit of what we were talking about already. So it's like putting things in their way, like their food, like their drinks, like their pathway to get to different places. And essentially what it's doing is expanding surface area, right? Like IKEA does. You're giving people that much more sort of friction against your booth, you know, as they go through life. And it gives you more of a chance to say, hey, you know, whatever. Have them see you and say, what do you guys do, you know? I'm sorry, I wasn't more.
That's okay. That's okay.
I feel like I underdelivered on that.
Well, actually, no. You know, because the give us a hand in the exhibit hall, I think, you know, it's really funny when you're here at Event Tech Live and, you know, James and Adam and those guys, they're walking around, you know, they're listening to the exhibitors, right? You know, and I think that there are a lot of organizers that, you know, they'll hand off their show floor to the general services contractor, and then it's kind of like an out of sight, out of mind, right? Where, you know, one of the things that we try to do, we work with a wonderful lady in Chicago who goes with us for most of our exhibit halls, and, you know, she walks to every exhibitor every day, and it's like, hey, what can I do for you? You know, what can I do for you? You know, and then they might say things like, you know, I need something reprinted. Okay, well, she can't do that, but she can get that immediate person who can get them immediate help. You know, and I think, you know, that's really important. You know, take an interest in your own show floor, right? Know what's going on. Absolutely. And I think that's important.
Absolutely. And, you know, opportunities to mingle with the attendees in receptions and other sort of perhaps more interactive things like competitions or other such things, you know, making more things available to them. I feel like it all goes down to the bottom line for the organizer. This all brings money to the organizer, makes them more relevant, makes it easier for their sales team to get next year's hall filled, and just brings in a bunch more revenue. So I don't feel like it's altruistic necessarily for people to do some of these things. I feel like it's just good business.
Well, that's wonderful. Good business is what we're here for. Exactly.
All right, bring us home, Tess.
All right. So, as we are closing out, I just want to thank everyone for tuning in. And I think we should take a time to drop in any of the chats that you're visiting us and tell us what wonderful ideas you have around how exhibitors slash sponsors can maximize their experience at some of our shows face to face. Is there a digital component that they could be doing to drive traffic to their area? What kinds of things do you think might be innovative for the future? So, again, we thank you, Peter, for giving us this time and this space and opportunity.
Thank you guys for having me on. I really appreciate it. You guys been a lot of fun. It's been great having you guys here in the booth. You guys kind of make us a little bit nicer and more interesting than we otherwise would have been, and we really appreciate that.
Well, that's what partnership's about, right? We have to help each other out. Keith, anything you'd like to say before we sign off for a moment? Not
Yeah,
long.
only that we'll be back in just a little bit.
Absolutely. And come play with us. Take care.